Welcome to Marriage in God's Hands. I'm Alonzo Smith, and this is my dear wife, June Smith. June is a professor at Long Island University, and I'm the Family Life Director for the Greater New York Conference. We have an important topic that we want to talk about today, talking to your child about sex. Now, I must admit that this is not a topic that parents too often get involved in, yet it's such a necessary and important topic. Why is this so?
I'm sure you'll agree that we live in a very sensuous society and that our young people are confronted with decisions that they must make daily about what to do as it relates to their sexuality. We live in New York and frequently visit with schools, but work predominantly with families that have children who are involved sexually, who are sexually active at very young ages, and parents who are unable to address the issue because they don't know what to do. They don't quite understand it themselves.
So, we're going to try and see if we can help you. First, we want to break it down, and we're going to look at different age category and help you to understand what's going on in a child's mind as it relates to the child's sexuality. Let's start from the very beginning, 18 months to 3 years. What's happening at this stage?
It's important that we start here because sexuality doesn't begin when the child gets to be the adolescent and begins to confront those issues. The moment of birth even, the child in the first few years of life begin to have certain needs, the need to be cuddled, the need to be touched, this whole attachment that eventually leads to intimacy in the adult years or younger, young adult years begins at this stage. So that if this relationship with the caregiver, predominantly the parents, are not established in a healthy way, it will affect the way the child's sexuality is acted out in the long run. So at the first, I would say, 3 years of life, the bonding, the attachment, the cuddling, you know, all of that nurturance is so important in securing the child.
Isn't this the time, the stage 2, when they give attention to genitalia? And I always have some tongue tie on that one. And self-pleasing.
The child is curious at that point, and as they get older, into going into 3 or 4 years, and they begin to recognize that their genitalia is what it is. And sometimes they are curious and they will ask questions about their body parts. Yes.
And that is normal. You know, parents, when this is happening, please don't get flustered and frightened. This is a normal progression of the development of the child. Well, let's look at 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, because this is the age of curiosity now.
They become curious, as you say. They begin to further explore their body parts. They begin to touch themselves. They begin to want to know where babies came from even. And these are just age-appropriate conversations that parents should have, that parents should explain to them that this is where, you know, that babies come from mommy and daddy. You don't have to tell them more than that. When they get older, then you can progress with more information.
You know, it's strange. I remember when I was a kid way back, I don't remember what age, but I was young, and I did ask my mom that question, but you don't want to hear the answer she gave me. She told me I came by a plane dropped me off. Now, we have long passed that age, and what we are saying to parents is that be honest, be truthful, be upfront, just be age appropriate how you carry on this discussion.
As a child gets older, say in going into
5 and 6,
they begin to model adult behavior. So it's not unusual to find them playing house, playing, you know, the boy acting dad, and if it's just 2 sisters or more, one will be the father and the other will be the mother. And the whole idea is they see these role distinctions and they begin to play this out in their relationship. And that's the stage where you observe to see whether their interpretation of the roles are even clear. And you might be use it as a teachable moment.
And you do have gender socialization here and gender identity, because girls stay with girls and boys with boys, and the girls don't want the boys to come over, and the boys, you know, it's like, ooh.
It's amazing how the next stage, though, is played out, where the direct opposite happens. At that stage, by the time the child gets to be about 8 or 9 years old, now they begin to be a little more sensitive, or there's an affinity between boys and girls, and they begin to notice that they like to be in the presence.
So cross-gender socialization is taking place.
At that stage.
And they become more self-conscious, how they dress, how they appear, and don't you see also at this stage they want a kind of to be exclusive, privacy in getting dressed and things like that?
That is very normal, and rightly so.
Now we move on, because the child is growing up, and I'm sure as you're listening, we're going to touch at one stage or another, if you have children, where your children are, the 10 and the 12-year-olds. Now, these individuals, this is where puberty begins, the age of discovery now.
At this stage, it is where, yes, menarche for girls begin, and boys begin to have nocturnal emissions, etc. And what tends to happen at that stage is, it is critical that the parent prepares the child for this, so they don't get there and wonder, oh my goodness, what's happening here. The child should know, the little girl should know, this is what's going to happen, and this is what you do when it happens. And the little boy should know, or the young man should know, this is what's going to happen soon.
So there should be no discovery, you're saying, at this stage?
There should be no surprises.
Or surprises. The parents should prepare their children. But what if I'm uncomfortable, you know, because you have to understand you have different parents. Some of them are young parents, teenage parents, whatever it is. But what if I'm uncomfortable myself to talk to my child? Can I make an excuse to say, well, I'm better off not saying anything than not to say the right thing?
If you're uncomfortable talking to your child about their sexuality, then you might want to give the child a book that they can read that explains it well, or you might want to have somebody else speak with the child, maybe your sister or your
uncle and
somebody
aunt,
who is an appropriate person who should explain to the child what is likely to happen.
But we want to give a word of caution here. Personally, we don't like when parents give up their parental role. We would prefer if you go read a book, if you go ask some questions, practice in the basement, practice on a chair, practice when you're alone in the bedroom, what to say, how to say, and then come and talk to your children. We really don't like when you have to give up your parental role, because that's your job, that's what you're to do. But we're saying the least of the two options would be then to get help from a family member, but be very careful who that family member is, someone that you can really, really trust, and there won't be any repercussions afterwards.
Yes, because as we know, the world is not a safe place, and sometimes we place our children in very vulnerable positions when we negate our role and somebody else fill that in. And sometimes children get exploited in the process.
Well, now we come to the challenging age group where you reach 13 years of age and beyond. This is the age where quite a lot of physical changes are taking place now with the boys and with the girls. Let's talk with the boys first and the physical changes that are taking place and how they feel and how they act, because you'll agree this is a challenging period for the parent now.
This is usually the difficult point. You know, there are lots of other dimensions that we could mention, but we don't want to make this too academic. So just to keep it simple, the adolescent phase of development is where some people describe as the crisis years. And that tends to create conflicts in families, because the little person is shedding the child years and now emerging into this new phase of their development. And at the same time, psychologically, emotionally, that is happening, their physical changes occurring. And they don't quite understand that. So they get caught between being a child, being treated like a child, but at the same time being expected to be more mature. And that creates a lot of trauma sometimes for the young adolescent.
And the girls now, they now start seeing some physical signs, and they start feeling like a woman, and they sometimes have a change in attitude. And but for the parents, don't parents have to also grow and gradualize rules and boundaries and make them age appropriate, so that what you require of your, say, 7-year-old or 8 or 9-year-old, now you have a teenager, you have to change those rules and make them still age appropriate.
Yeah, the rules have to be age appropriate and at all stage of the child's development. But you also want to know that sexuality is not something that is stagnant. You're constantly coming into your sense of who you are. And the values you have been taught with and the way you're socialized around, being comfortable with your body and being comfortable with your own sense of self and who you are, will weigh heavily on how you perform, how you behave in an intimate relationship.
And parents must understand that at this stage now, to some extent, they're losing some control because peer pressure is taking over. And they will find that their children are leaning more towards their friends and are listening more to their friends than to them.
And sometimes that creates dissonance. There is a difficult state that occurs where the parent is losing power, and at the same time, the child needs the parent. So there's this dual relationship that exists. But the child is still a child, and you still need to be the parent. So although they act like they're grown up and they know so much, they really don't. They're only 14 or 15 or even 18. And you want to give them information, you want to parent them, provide the resources that they need to gradualize and grow into this young adult that they're heading, and make sure you model appropriate behavior.
And this is the stage when the teenager has an increased interest in intimacy, so that parents should not surrender their right to talk to their child about sexuality, because at this stage now they want more, they want to hear more, and their friends are providing sometimes inappropriate information.
The reality is that the adolescent age, the adolescent is not necessarily talking to the parent. So hopefully the parent did the job before, where the child understands what's about to happen and where they're heading. So they are now able to make right choices and good judgment.
We're talking about talking to your child about sex. We have a lot more coming up. We want to share with you some sexual myths, and most of all, what can parents do? If you feel incapable, if you're not able to handle it, or you're having problems, what can you do? We're going to go into those areas in our second part. We want you to be with us. We have some exciting things coming up. You will love it. Thank you for watching, and remember, part 2 is coming up. Don't go away. Stay right there, because we'll be right back. We'll be back.
There are many how-to books available, but there's one that's free and perfect for every couple: How You Can Build a Better Marriage. Bible-based matrimonial advice is given in a light-hearted, easy-to-read manner for those contemplating marriage, newlyweds, couples in their golden years, and everyone in between. Simply call or write for your free copy of this amazing little booklet, a handy little tool to help build a better marriage.
Welcome back to Marriage in God's Hands. Alonzo and I have been talking about how do you talk to your child about sexuality?
Well, we have shared some of the issues relating to the child at each stage of the development of the child. Now, I have some sexual myths that I want to share with you and get your reaction on it. First one says, sex education and sexual knowledge increases sexual activity.
That's actually a myth. If you talk to your child about sex, that's not going to drive your child to have sex. What you are trying to do is to prepare your child, to help them to understand what is sex, that sex is a gift from God, that sex is designed for marriage, and that the child understands that they are a sexual being, that they have urges and hormones that will create certain responses and certain feelings, and that they should be prepared to handle this. So, like everything else in the child's development, you want to inoculate this child with information so that they can behave appropriately.
Okay, here's another one. If you tell your child too much about sexual issues, they will become confused and they will get upset.
Now, again, if your child is younger than an adolescent, you want to speak to them according to their age. So you don't want to give them more information than they can conceptualize and that they can understand. So if they ask questions, use it as a teachable moment. Don't tell them you shouldn't be asking that, or don't tell them, you know, this is inappropriate. Now, if the child says something that is clearly promiscuous, you should use it as a cue, because if your child is young and they're talking about sexually explicit information, it is a sign that this child could be exposed to harmful material like pornography, or maybe even being molested. So you want to be alert to some of those cues. But if your child is innocently asking you about, you know, where babies come from or what their genitals are, etc., use appropriate language and explain to them in very simple terms, babies come from mommy and daddy. And when they're older, you can tell them more. And as they go to school, they will learn about biology and how their bodies work. And it will all come together.
June, I hear you saying that, and I'm in agreement with you. But there are some of our listeners out there who honestly feel that they should wait until their child come to them, then they will tell them.
Well, you might think that, but the reality is sometimes your child will not come to you. And what that does is it predisposes them to get information from inappropriate sources, because they are going to come upon sexual information or information about sex, whether it is from the media or it is from their friends or other places. So you want to make sure that they have the right information. And you therefore want to have the discussion at the different stages of their development so they can be prepared. For example, as a girl is coming into menarche, you don't want to wait until she starts to have her period to say this is what's going to happen. She should know what is going to happen, how her body works, because she's able to understand that at that stage. But that's not a conversation you'd have with a 4-year-old.
Okay. Now, I'm a parent, and I didn't take any course on sexual education and anything like that. So I don't have all the answers. At least I don't think I have all the answers. But I feel that I should have all the answers before I am in a position to be able to speak to my child and to answer those questions. Is that a myth, that I believe I should have all the answers before I can touch this topic?
In the first place, no one has all the answers. But you don't have to wait until you think you know what you need to know in order to speak with your child. In other words, you should educate yourself. Read as much as you can. Talk to people who you think might know more. But become knowledgeable about the conversations that you should have with your son and with your daughter, because they do need to hear mom and dad talk about. And it shouldn't be just coming from mom. It should also be coming from dad. Moms can't prepare boys to be men, and nor girls to...
Fathers preparing girls to be women.
Exactly.
Sometimes they have to do their best based on the circumstance, but that's why God gave us 2 parents, and each one has a specific role to play. And we're talking about the rule rather than the exception. Okay, parents, I have to commend those of you who are doing a good job in talking to your children about sexual activities and their sexuality. It's important, it's vital. As Christians, that's part of your Christian obligation. And so I commend those of you who are doing it. But I'm cognizant of the fact, as a clinician dealing with parents and children, I am aware of the fact that some parents are not doing it. Some parents are intimidated, are afraid. So we would like to talk now to you, those parents who are not doing it or afraid of doing it. What can you do? What can parents do? And the first thing we want to say to you is, don't panic. Stay calm, stay cool, be in control of yourself, and just talk to your child naturally. And don't act as if this is a crisis, or this is some hidden secret or some mystery that you have to. No, be calm in talking to your child about their sexuality. But in staying calm, remember to be age appropriate. That's important.
It is also important to start early. Start to have your child understand what is appropriate behavior at each stage of their development. So you teach them how to protect themselves against unwanted touches. Anything that make them uncomfortable should be something that they should report to you. You teach them the appropriate language to describe their genitalia, for example. So the child understands this is a natural, normal part of my anatomy, and it's okay. I can talk about it. So you should have these conversations ongoing and continuously. So the child knows this is a normal thing I can talk to my parents about. And as they get older, they won't be intimidated to come with more complicated questions.
And you know, as you said that parents should be in touch with their own sexuality, because if they are uncomfortable with the word sex, if they are uncomfortable with talking about the issue, and sometimes it's because of how they were socialized that creates this level of discomfort. If they are uncomfortable, then it makes it more difficult for them to talk to their children. So we're saying, parents, that you have to get in touch with your true self and be comfortable with your own sexuality.
And that indicates that you should have appropriate display of sexual behavior. For example, a child should observe their parents holding hands or hugging each other or kissing each other in a way that is appropriate,
yes,
so that the child knows this is a normal thing that happens between intimate partners and that it's okay to see mom and dad hugging. Of course, you should have boundaries, and there should be very clear limits on the disclosure and exposure to sexually explicit behavior or material.
So tied to what June is saying, parents, is that you should establish appropriate intimate boundaries. There comes a time when a father and daughter should not be in the same room dressing or in the bathroom doing things together. There comes a time when you have to be appropriate in your relationship with your child. The fact that it's your child, you should still create boundaries.
And it's not appropriate that mother should be having having shower with her son beyond a childhood stage. There comes a time when that should happen.
Inappropriate.
Or sleeping with the child. These are just things that, you know, create situations that could lead to other kinds of inappropriate behavior. So you want to start it early, get the child in a separate space so they know that they have their own space, and if anyone else should intrude on them, then they know to report it to their parents.
You should also establish appropriate boundaries. We're having difficulty with children being molested. Most times they are molested by some significant other, someone they know, sometimes someone right there in the family. So parents, you have to be on guard. It is your right and your responsibility to create the protection that is necessary for your child. So you must have adequate supervision for your child at all times.
Many children are left to the media. They are left after school by themselves. They watch inappropriate material, whether it is on HBO or wherever they get this information. And so parents must be vigilant in screening the access to whether the computer or the television, so that your child is not taking in some of that filth that exists on some of these media. It is just a very sad thing to know that there are so many predators, sexual predators, that are available right there in your house through the computer. And if you're not aware of that as parents, it could be like you're throwing your child into the streets or into a nightclub someplace. So parents really have to work over time to make sure that they are safeguarding their children against some of this evil.
I have this question that I want to ask you, and I'm sure my listeners would be interested in the answer. Should there be sexual secrets between a parent and a child?
There should be no secrets between a parent and a child. If a parent were to touch a child in their private parts and say this is a secret between mommy and her son, or daddy and his daughter, that is not acceptable. And if you're a child and you're being touched or being molested in any way by your parents or anyone else, that is not right. That is not acceptable, and you need to tell somebody. Tell your pastor, tell your teacher, your counselor, someone. But no one should be touching you in your private parts.
And parents, this is what you're to say to your children. You're to let them know that they are to have no sexual secrets between you and them. When someone say to them, okay, we're going to have the secret between us, and we're going to do this, and they give them cookies and what have you, and take them places, and tell your children, get it in their head. Everything you must tell your daddy, everything you must tell your mommy. There should be no secret. Drill that in them so that they know. If anything happens, God forbid, we don't want anything to happen to your children, but God forbid, if something should happen, they must know that they have to come to you.
I think another important thing is that it is still okay to teach your child to abstain from sex before marriage. While it is true that a large percentage of young people, in fact, now it says it begins in the younger grades. It's not unusual to have 7th and 8th graders start becoming sexually active. You may not necessarily have intercourse occurring, but you have all of this other abnormal behavior, whether it is oral sex or anal sex or some of these perverted things happening. Young people, Christ expects you to keep your bodies as his temple. And you might be going to schools where your peers have an open market where these things are happening. It is not right. And if that's going on in your world, in your life, you really need to talk to somebody about it. So we just can't emphasize enough how important it is to teach your child that it is okay to be a virgin and to remain pure and to stay faithful to God until you're married.
Parents, reinforce biblical teachings, biblical principles in your children, and live those biblical principles that they can see. Let them know that Timothy says, flee youthful lust. That Paul says they are to abstain from fornication. And the Bible clearly states the body is not for fornication. We have to go back to the basics. We have to go back to the Word of God. It is your duty to teach your child about their sexuality, but also put it in a spiritual context. That's what God wants you to do. Happy parenting. May God bless you, you and your family, and your children.